The sun sets and the world begins its slow retreat into quiet. Lights dim in the streets, conversations hush, and the clock ticks softly toward the stillness of night. Yet for so many of us, the peace outside feels like a cruel contrast to the chaos within. The day's demands may have faded, but our thoughts, the relentless, nagging ones, are still wide awake. They replay awkward moments from hours ago, rehearse worst-case scenarios for tomorrow, or dive headfirst into a deep pool of self-doubt and regrets. It feels unfair, doesn't it? After all the effort you put into surviving the day, you now have to wrestle with your own mind just to rest. But you're not alone. There's a reason your thoughts grow louder when the world gets quiet. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius wrote by lamplight, reminding himself and us that the battle isn't against the noise outside, but the storm within. When the lights go out, we're left with only ourselves, and it's in those quiet hours that the real work begins. Not work in the world, but in the mind. This isn't just about sleep. It's about reclaiming your peace, about refusing to let your mind become a prisoner of fears, regrets, and unfinished conversations. Tonight, we're going to lean into the wisdom of the ancients, not as scholars, but as people trying to find some stillness in the middle of all this noise. Because peace isn't given, it's practiced. And Stoicism, with all its raw and practical truth, just might be the calm you've been searching for. If these words feel like they're meeting you where you are, somewhere between reflection and resilience, consider subscribing. It's a way of saying this matters to you, that this journey toward clarity, depth, and inner stillness isn't just something you think about, it's something you're committed to. It's strange how silence, something we often crave during the chaos of the day, can become so overwhelming at night. You move through the hours ticking off tasks, responding to people, solving problems. Your body is in motion, your mind is occupied. But then the day ends, the lights dim, the noise fades, and suddenly you're alone with your thoughts. That's when it hits. The things you brushed aside while keeping busy now rush forward like they've been waiting all day for this quiet moment to confront you. The unresolved conversations, the worry about tomorrow, the memory of that one mistake you thought you'd forgotten. They don't knock gently. They pour in like a flood. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And this is what night reveals, the unconscious. Not because it's trying to torment you, but because it's finally been given space to speak. The mind doesn't race without reason. When the body stops, the nervous system shifts gears. There's no longer an external task to anchor it. And without something physical to focus on, the energy turns inward. It searches for unfinished business, loose ends, unresolved tension, unprocessed emotions. What you didn't feel during the day now demands attention. What you didn't say now echoes. In this way, silence is never really empty. It's filled with all the things we haven't yet faced. And the truth is, most people stay busy not because they're productive, but because they're afraid of what stillness might show them. As Socrates once said, "Beware the barrenness of a busy life." Stillness, if you let it, will hold up a mirror. That's why nights feel heavier, because we've trained ourselves to avoid that mirror. We drown it out with stimulation, endless scrolling, background noise, mental chatter, anything but being fully alone with ourselves. And when all distractions are gone, what's left is the raw, unfiltered truth. The fears we carry, the guilt we pretend doesn't matter, the longing for something we can't quite name. It's not that we're weak for feeling this way, it's that we're human. The Stoics taught that suffering comes not from the thing itself, but from our judgment of it. Epictetus reminded us, "We are disturbed not by what happens, but by our opinions about what happens." And often, those opinions are buried deep beneath layers of avoidance. The silence simply unmasks them. There's a kind of honesty that only the dark invites, and while it can feel brutal at times, it also carries an invitation to listen, to notice, to finally feel. The thoughts that race are often ones we never gave permission to surface, but they've been there, shaping our choices, our moods, our relationships. It's in the stillness that we're given a choice, to ignore them again or to sit with them and try to understand what they're trying to say. As Aristotle observed, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, and that kind of knowing doesn't come from movement, it comes from pausing. But that pause can feel unbearable if you expect it to be peaceful right away. It rarely is, especially if you've spent years avoiding the deeper currents of your own mind. It takes practice to get comfortable in your own silence. It takes courage to let the thoughts come without reacting to each one. The Buddhists talk about the monkey mind, always jumping, grasping, fleeing. The Stoics, too, recognized this restlessness. Marcus Aurelius, in his journals, reminded himself again and again to return to the present moment, to what is within his control. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That reminder doesn't silence the noise, but it does give you a way to relate to it differently. Because when you start to see the racing thoughts not as enemies, but as signals, everything changes. That flood of memories and fears is trying to tell you something. Maybe you're carrying too much. Maybe there's a conversation you need to have. Maybe you've been trying to be everything to everyone and it's slowly wearing you down. The thoughts don't always arrive with clarity. They come jumbled, exaggerated, dramatic even. But if you let them land, without grabbing onto them, without pushing them away, they begin to sort themselves out, like sediment settling in water. What's important remains, the rest floats away. And in that moment, you're no longer drowning in thought. You're observing, you're choosing, you're remembering that your thoughts are not facts. They are not prophecies. They are not permanent. Plato wrote, "The first and best victory is to conquer self." And that battle begins not with aggression but with awareness, with the gentle discipline of staying present with what is rather than reacting to what might be. That's the core of Stoic philosophy, not to escape life's pain, but to meet it with clarity and intention. This is why night matters. It's not just a time to rest, it's a time to reckon, to sift through the noise and find the still voice underneath. And that voice doesn't shout, it whispers. It often speaks in the language of intuition, of body tension, of half-formed thoughts. But if you listen, really listen, it has wisdom to offer. About what you value, about what's weighing you down, about what you need to release to finally find peace. There's a reason why some of the greatest thinkers, Seneca, Aurelius, even Jung, wrote their most honest reflections at night. Because the dark invites depth. It strips away the performance of the day. It humbles us. It reveals what we've ignored, yes, but it also shows us what we've survived, what we've endured. The mind may race, but that doesn't mean it's broken. It means it's awake, and being awake in this way is the beginning of healing. So the next time your thoughts surge after the world goes quiet, don't panic. Don't try to escape. Let them come. Let them crash and swirl and rise. And then, breathe. Remind yourself that this too is part of being alive. That the storm will pass. That peace doesn't come from avoiding the silence, but from learning to live with it. You're not alone in this. And you're not failing because your mind won't shut off. You're just being asked to sit with what's true. And if you do, even for a moment, you'll notice that the thoughts start to slow. The noise begins to soften. And underneath all of it, there's a kind of stillness that's been waiting for you all along. There's a strange comfort in knowing that sleeplessness isn't a modern curse. Long before the world was buzzing with screens and notifications, people still lay awake under the same sky, wrestling with their minds. Even the strongest among us, the emperors, the warriors, the thinkers, knew what it meant to stare into the darkness with a heavy heart. Marcus Aurelius, ruler of one of the greatest empires in history, spent his nights journaling, not celebrating victories, but confronting the chaos within himself. His personal reflections are filled with reminders to stay grounded, to accept what cannot be changed, to return to what matters. He wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." And still, he had to remind himself of that over and over again. That alone says something. Even emperors didn't feel at peace just because they held power. Even they weren't immune to the restless noise that creeps in when the world gets quiet. We've built this image in our heads that strength means never wavering, that clarity means never questioning. But when you look at the actual writings of these figures, Aurelius, Seneca, even Plato, you see something else entirely. You see people thinking deeply, doubting themselves, trying to make sense of life just like the rest of us. Their titles didn't protect them from anxiety or regret or longing. They just had tools to face those feelings more honestly. Socrates, often considered the father of Western philosophy, spent his life asking difficult questions, not because he had all the answers, but because he believed that wisdom begins in admitting how little we know. That's not weakness, that's courage. Even Carl Jung, one of the founding minds of modern psychology, struggled with the inner world. He spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, suppress, or avoid. According to Jung, these hidden parts are not to be feared, but understood. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, he said, but by making the darkness conscious. What keeps us up at night is often that unconscious darkness reaching out, asking to be seen. And the irony is, the more we fight it, the louder it becomes. The more we try to suppress or ignore what hurts, the more power it has over us. That's why so many powerful minds, from philosophers to psychologists, return to the same practice, self-examination. Not the harsh kind, where you beat yourself up over everything, but the steady, clear-eyed kind, where you acknowledge what's rising up in you, even if you don't understand it fully. Plato believed that the unexamined life wasn't worth living. He didn't mean that we should obsess over every mistake or constantly try to fix ourselves. He meant we should pay attention to our patterns, our values, our impulses. He believed that when we understand ourselves better, we can live more intentionally. And what better time to do that than at night, when there's nothing left to distract us? Still, that kind of reflection takes work. It's not always comforting. Sometimes it brings up guilt, or fear, or memories we'd rather not revisit. But that's part of being human. You're not meant to feel light all the time. You're not supposed to have it all figured out. Even those who shaped entire schools of thought had nights where they doubted everything. Even they lost sleep over things they couldn't control. So why do we judge ourselves so harshly for doing the same? There's a tendency to believe that if we were stronger, we wouldn't feel this way. But the truth is, strength often looks like facing what hurts with an open heart. It looks like staying with the discomfort long enough to understand what it's trying to teach us. Aristotle wrote that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, but that knowledge doesn't come overnight. It comes through experience, through mistakes, through moments that keep us awake at 2 a.m., wondering who we are and what we really want from this life. Those questions aren't signs of failure. They're signs that you care, that you're awake, not just physically, but spiritually. And maybe that's something to be honored, because most people numb out. They shut down, they avoid. But if you're here, thinking, feeling, wondering, then you're still open, you're still learning, you're still alive in the deepest sense of the word. And yes, it can feel like too much sometimes, the weight of it, the vulnerability. But that's where growth begins, in that quiet place between who you were and who you're becoming. The philosophers didn't claim to be free from pain. They just learned how to move through it with clarity. They learned that peace doesn't come from avoiding the hard parts. It comes from walking straight into them, guided by reason, honesty, and a little faith in the process. You might never rule a kingdom. You might never write a philosophical treatise or have your name etched into history, but your inner world is just as worthy of attention. Your questions are just as valuable, your sleepless nights are just as human, and the way you choose to meet them, that matters. Because in that choice, you reclaim something powerful, not control over your thoughts, but your relationship to them, not certainty, but the willingness to keep asking, keep learning, keep showing up with courage. And that's what connects us, not just to the thinkers of the past, but to each other. The shared truth that behind every strong face, every calm voice, every quiet room at night, there's a mind trying to make sense of something. That's not weakness. That's the human condition. And if even emperors, warriors, and philosophers lay awake in that same struggle, then maybe, just maybe, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. We tend to think of overthinking as a defect, something to fix or silence. But what if the thoughts that swirl in your head late at night aren't problems to eliminate, but signals to understand? That's what the Stoics believed. To them, a restless mind wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an invitation to observe. Instead of battling every anxious thought like it's the enemy, they practiced stepping back, watching what arose and asking a better question. What is this trying to tell me? There's wisdom in that. Your thoughts, especially the ones that repeat themselves, don't show up for no reason. They're messengers, sometimes clumsy, sometimes dramatic, sometimes hard to decipher, but always bringing something that wants your attention. You don't have to agree with everything your mind says, and the Stoics would be the first to warn you against doing so. Epictetus reminded his students not to get carried away by impressions, but to pause and evaluate them. It's not things themselves that disturb us, he wrote, but our opinions about them. In other words, what causes distress isn't the event, but how we interpret it. And our thoughts are often tangled with judgment, memory, fear, and desire. But when you slow down and listen without rushing to react, something shifts. You begin to notice which thoughts are born from fear and which are rooted in truth. Which ones echo your past and which ones are trying to protect you, sometimes in ways that no longer serve you. Carl Jung spoke about this internal dialogue often. He said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." In that way, racing thoughts aren't the problem. They're the call to awaken. They're the parts of you trying to speak up after being ignored all day. We're so trained to think clearly when it comes to the external world. We organize our schedules, prioritize tasks, measure progress. But when it comes to the internal world, the mind, the heart, the stories we carry, we often leave it cluttered and unresolved. The Stoics saw the danger in that. They believed the mind should be as orderly as a well-run household, not because it must be silent at all times, but because it should be in harmony with itself. But harmony doesn't mean absence of noise. It means knowing which sounds belong and which ones are distractions. And you don't get there by shutting your mind down. You get there by paying attention. There's an art to this kind of noticing. It's not about indulging every negative spiral or falling into self-analysis loops. It's about creating a little space between the thought and your reaction to it. Marcus Aurelius, in his meditations, constantly reminded himself to separate judgment from reality. He'd say things like, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's not just a motivational phrase, it's a practical tool. When you're lying awake, gripped by a thought that won't let go, you can ask yourself, is this thought helpful? Is it even true? Or is it just noise? And even if the thought isn't helpful, it's worth asking where it comes from. Because often, what we label as anxiety is actually the mind's attempt to keep us safe. Fear is trying to protect us. Shame is trying to keep us in line. Regret is trying to make sure we don't repeat mistakes. They're all trying to serve us, just not always skillfully. That's where the Stoic perspective becomes powerful. Instead of seeing these thoughts as threats, you learn to decode them. Instead of reacting with panic, you respond with curiosity. Aristotle believed that understanding was the beginning of wisdom. He saw emotion and reason not as enemies, but as parts of the same whole. Emotions may cloud our reason at times, but they're also rooted in our values. What you worry about, what keeps you up, it usually points to something that matters to you. That's why it hurts. This is why the Stoics weren't emotionless, despite the stereotype. They weren't trying to become robots. They were trying to gain clarity. They knew emotions and thoughts could be turbulent, but they believed in training the mind to see clearly through that turbulence. Like a sailor learning to navigate by the stars instead of being tossed by the waves. That training didn't mean shutting down thoughts. It meant studying them, understanding where they came from, and choosing how to respond. They called this discipline of assent, the practice of evaluating impressions and deciding whether to accept them. Imagine how different your nights would feel if you treated each intrusive thought like that. Not something to fight or believe instantly, but something to question, something to sit with, like a guest knocking at your door. You don't have to let every guest in, but you can meet them with awareness. And sometimes even awareness is enough to disarm a thought. When you simply name what's happening, this is worry, this is insecurity, this is fear of not being enough, it loses some of its power. Naming turns the fog into something you can see. It's like turning the lights on in a dark room. The furniture's still there, but now you're less likely to trip over it. That's what Stoic awareness does. It gives you clarity without needing the problem to disappear immediately. Plato said, "The beginning is the most important part of the work." And that beginning, the simple act of noticing your thoughts without being consumed by them, that's what changes everything. You begin to realize that not every thought requires a response. Not every mental loop has to be solved tonight. Some thoughts are just echoes from an earlier wound. Some are future fears dressed as urgency. Some are just habits your brain hasn't let go of yet. And the more you observe, the more you understand. Understanding brings space. Space brings calm. And from that calm, you can choose your next move, even if it's as simple as taking a deep breath, rolling over in bed, and deciding not to follow that thought down the rabbit hole again. This isn't a skill you master overnight. It's a practice, one you return to gently, without judgment, even when your thoughts are messy, even when your heart feels heavy, because that's when you need it most. Not when everything's peaceful, but when the storm is loud and confusing. That's the moment to remember what the Stoics knew. Your thoughts are not your enemy. They're not problems to fix. They're signals. And if you can listen, not perfectly but patiently, you'll begin to hear the truth underneath them. And that truth, once understood, has the power to quiet even the loudest mind. There's something about the stillness of night that makes everything feel bigger. A small worry from the day becomes a mountain by midnight. A passing comment echoes like a siren in the quiet. You lie in bed, hoping for peace, but instead your mind starts opening doors you didn't even know were there. Thoughts start stacking on top of each other, and before you know it, you're overwhelmed by everything all at once, and in that moment, you feel helpless, like you've lost all control over your own mind. What makes it worse is that there's nothing to distract you. No conversations, no tasks, no noise. Just you, your thoughts, and a darkness that seems to stretch endlessly forward. But that feeling, that deep sinking helplessness, it isn't new, and it isn't a flaw in you. Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher born into slavery, understood it well. His life was one of limitations, of external conditions he couldn't control. But he taught something that flipped the entire script. Some things are in our control and some are not. And within that single idea is a kind of freedom that most people overlook. Because when you're caught in the spiral of nighttime anxiety, what you're really feeling is the weight of trying to control what you cannot. The future, other people's thoughts, past conversations, the outcome of things you haven't even begun yet. The mind clings to these things as if replaying or predicting them might somehow change them, but it won't. And the Stoics knew that. What you can control is how you relate to those thoughts. There's power in that idea, even if it sounds simple. The helplessness you feel doesn't come from the thought itself. It comes from believing you have no choice but to follow it. But Epictetus would argue otherwise. He believed that the only true freedom lies in mastering your response. He once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That includes what happens inside your own head, especially at night. Because the stories you tell yourself when you're tired, alone, and vulnerable, those can shape how you feel about everything else. And if you believe that you're at the mercy of your own mind, then you'll stay trapped in that helplessness. But there's a shift that happens the moment you realize you still have choices, even in the quiet. You can't control whether a thought shows up, that's automatic. But you can choose what you do with it. You can decide to observe it instead of obey it, to question it instead of absorb it, to gently turn your attention toward your breath, your body, your surroundings, grounding yourself in what's real instead of what's imagined. And maybe that doesn't make the worry disappear, but it does shrink it. It puts a little space between you and the spiral, and sometimes that space is all you need to breathe again. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." That applies not just to events in your life, but to every thought that passes through your mind. You are not your fear. You are not your worst memory. You are not the anxious prediction your brain whispers at 2 a.m. You are the awareness underneath those things, the part of you that can witness without getting pulled under. And that part is where your power lives. That's what the Stoics were pointing toward when they spoke of inner freedom. Not the absence of trouble, but the presence of self-mastery. Of course, this takes practice. The mind is used to running the show. It loves to imagine, to dramatize, to rehearse every worst-case scenario like it's preparing for a performance. But when you begin to see those thoughts as just thoughts, not instructions, not truth, not destiny, something starts to change. You no longer take every mental whisper as a command. You begin to respond with calm, with perspective. And even on the nights where the noise gets loud again, you remember you've met this noise before. You've sat with it and survived. And that memory becomes a kind of anchor. The reason nighttime makes us feel so helpless isn't just the lack of distractions. It's the illusion that we're alone in our struggle. But we're not. The greatest minds in history have felt this same vulnerability. They've faced the same sleepless nights, the same overthinking, the same sense of futility. Socrates, who spent his life questioning human behavior, said, know thyself. And to know yourself means to meet these moments of fear and not turn away, to see them not as signs of weakness, but as invitations to grow stronger from within. Even Aristotle saw the connection between reflection and virtue. He believed that the highest good for a human was not pleasure or success, but reasoned action aligned with one's values. And that includes how we handle our thoughts when no one's watching. That includes how we speak to ourselves when things are quiet. If we react with panic, we build panic. But if we respond with steadiness, even when it's hard, we start building resilience. That's not some motivational slogan. That's how the mind actually changes, one small decision at a time. It helps to remember that not every solution needs to arrive tonight. Sometimes the only thing required is presence. Sometimes you don't need to solve the problem, you just need to stop feeding it. Let the thought drift by. Come back to your breath. Feel the air move in and out of your body. Place your hand on your chest. Remind yourself that you're here, alive, safe in this moment. And if the thought returns, let it. Let it echo like a passing wave. But don't chase it. Don't fight it. You have better things to do, like rest. This is the kind of power Epictetus was talking about. Not the kind that dominates the world, but the kind that guides your inner life with quiet strength. The kind that allows you to feel fear and not be ruled by it. To experience uncertainty and not lose your center. To lie awake with a racing mind and still choose peace over panic. You don't need to be perfect at this. You just need to return to the practice again and again until the helplessness begins to fade. Not because the thoughts stop, but because you no longer believe that they have the final word. And maybe that's what reclaiming control really looks like. Not commanding your thoughts to be quiet, but learning to stand calmly in their presence. Not demanding a silent mind, but developing a steadier relationship with the noise. Because it's not the noise that breaks us, it's how we meet it. And with the right mindset, the right perspective, even the loudest mind can be softened by stillness. Even the most restless night can become a place of reflection, of resilience, and maybe, eventually, of rest. There's something strangely powerful about putting words to what you feel. Not poetic words, not explanations, just simple, honest labels. This is fear. This is shame. This is worry showing up again. That kind of naming doesn't seem like much on the surface, but it quietly changes everything. Because the moment you name a thought, you create just enough distance from it to stop being consumed by it. Before that moment, the thought feels like truth. It blends into your identity. It takes over your body. But when you pause and say, "This is fear," you shift from being inside the emotion to observing it from the outside. And observation brings space. That space is where peace begins. The Stoics understood this. They practiced what they called the discipline of assent, the ability to pause and examine every impression, every emotion, every narrative, before agreeing with it. Epictetus taught that we should never say, "I am afraid," but rather, "There is fear." That subtle shift matters. One statement fuses your identity with the feeling. The other recognizes it as a passing visitor. You are not fear. You are the one who notices fear. That's the difference between drowning in your thoughts and standing on the shore, watching the waves roll in. Carl Jung echoed a similar idea. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Unnamed emotions have that kind of power. They drive your choices, shape your self-image, keep you awake at night, all while hiding in the shadows of the mind. But when you give them a name, even just one word, you expose them to the light, and suddenly they lose their grip. Fear doesn't vanish, but it stops whispering lies about who you are. Shame doesn't disappear, but it loses the power to define you. There's a kind of freedom that comes with this clarity. The thoughts that felt overwhelming start to shrink down to size. You begin to see patterns. You notice how shame always shows up when you're trying something new, how fear always whispers louder when things get quiet. You see these responses not as signs that something is wrong with you, but as evidence that something is stirring in you, something alive, something worth paying attention to. Because emotions aren't random, they point to what matters. Fear shows up when you're near something meaningful. Shame creeps in when you're bumping against old wounds or expectations. And instead of pushing them away, the Stoics would encourage you to lean in, not to suffer, but to understand. Plato believed that clarity was the beginning of wisdom. He wrote that the soul should aim for harmony, not through force, but through knowledge of itself. And naming what you feel is the first step in knowing yourself. It's not about indulging every emotion. It's about meeting them with honesty. There's a reason why people keep journals, why they talk things out loud in empty rooms, why they write something down and suddenly feel lighter. Words anchor emotion. They turn what's swirling into something you can hold in your hands. Labeling thoughts is like picking up a tangled knot and realizing where it begins. This is anxiety. This is uncertainty. You don't need to fix it right away. Just naming it calms the nervous system. Just recognizing what you're experiencing helps your body stop treating it like a threat. Neuroscience backs this up too. Studies show that labeling emotions reduces activity in the amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for fight or flight responses, and activates the parts associated with reasoning and awareness. In other words, giving something a name returns control to the part of you that can respond instead of react. It also helps you speak to yourself more gently. When you say, "I'm overwhelmed," it feels like a judgment. But when you say, "There's a lot of fear in me right now," something softens. That sentence makes room. That sentence sounds like something you'd say to a friend. And that's the point. The way you speak to yourself shapes how you move through the world. Socrates believed that wisdom began with self-questioning, but he also modeled self-kindness in the way he challenged others. Not to humiliate, but to bring them closer to truth. The same applies inward. You don't label emotions to criticize yourself. You do it to understand, to slow down the storm and find your footing again. This kind of practice doesn't require perfect self-awareness. You don't have to get the word exactly right. You just need to pause long enough to listen to what's really going on, to stop letting the emotion drive your behavior blindly, to say, "Okay, this is shame. This is the feeling that tells me I'm not enough." And then, just let it be there for a moment. Breathe with it. Watch how it loses intensity simply by being seen. That's not weakness, that's strength. Over time, something remarkable begins to happen. You develop a kind of inner map. You start to recognize old patterns sooner. You catch yourself mid-thought and say, there's that fear of failure again. And with that recognition, you respond differently. Maybe you don't lash out. Maybe you don't give up. Maybe you don't spiral into doubt. Maybe you just breathe, acknowledge the emotion, and move forward anyway. That's the Stoic approach in action, not resistance, not suppression, but awareness and alignment with reason. It's not about being emotionless, it's about being unshaken. And to be unshaken, you have to first see clearly. Labeling your thoughts doesn't make you cold or detached, it makes you conscious. It turns reactivity into reflection. It turns chaos into something you can meet with presence. And it brings a kind of quiet strength that stays with you, even on nights when your mind refuses to settle. The goal isn't to get rid of fear or shame or uncertainty. The goal is to stop letting those emotions write your story in the dark. You get to be the author. And when you name the emotions, you take the pen back, One word at a time, one breath at a time, one moment of clarity in the middle of the night, and suddenly you're no longer powerless. You're present, you're grounded, you're awake, not in the anxious sense, but in the aware sense. And that changes everything. Some thoughts don't respond to logic. You can talk them through, journal about them, try to see them from every angle, and still they sit there, heavy, unresolved, like a stone in the chest. Marcus Aurelius knew this feeling well. He wasn't just a Roman emperor. He was also a thinker, a Stoic, and a man who struggled nightly with the same mental storms we do. In his private notes, never meant to be published, he wrote down his thoughts as a way to steady himself. His worries weren't always conquerable. Many times they weren't even clear. But Marcus had a way of approaching these uncertainties with clarity. When a problem couldn't be solved, he shifted focus from the problem itself to how he responded to it. That was the Stoic path. Not control over life, but over your posture within it. He would remind himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That's not just a motivational quote. It's a roadmap for nights when the weight of what you can't fix starts to take over. Marcus didn't try to outthink uncertainty. He accepted it. He wrote through it. He asked himself, is this within my control? And if the answer was no, he let it go. Not carelessly, not without feeling, but consciously. He understood that a mind chasing after every unresolved thought is a mind that will never find rest. There's a wisdom in choosing to step back, not because you don't care, but because caring too much about the wrong things drains your ability to act on the right ones. This idea of focusing on what you can control has echoed through time because it touches something we all experience: the helplessness that grows when your thoughts spiral out of reach. It feels productive to replay things, to imagine every possible future, to prepare for every scenario. But really, it's exhausting. Epictetus, another Stoic, said it clearly: make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. It's not a call to give up. It's a call to prioritize your energy. If you're lying in bed thinking about something that won't change no matter how many times you think it through, that's your cue. Let it go, not out of defeat, but out of wisdom. Marcus would often use writing as a mirror. His journals weren't perfect essays. They were raw, sometimes repetitive, sometimes emotional, but they helped him untangle what was real and what was just noise. He didn't try to be profound. He tried to be honest. One entry might be about death, the next about someone annoying him in court. But through it all, there was a steady theme. Return to what's within your reach. Return to the self. He reminded himself that most things, opinions, outcomes, judgments, weren't under his command. And if they weren't, they didn't deserve his suffering. Aristotle believed that virtue was found in action, not in thoughts or feelings. To him, character was built through habit, by doing the right thing, not just thinking the right way. And Marcus applied that, even in the realm of thought. He practiced a habit of turning away from rumination and toward perspective. When a worry returned, he didn't fight it. He noticed it, named it, and redirected his attention. You are distressed, he'd write to himself. But what are you distressed about? About something in the outer world. Then know that nothing outside of your own mind can truly harm you. The beauty of this practice is in its simplicity. You don't need to solve everything before sleep. You just need to sort what's yours to carry and what isn't. Write it down if it helps. Draw a line. On one side, what's in your control. On the other, what isn't. And then practice letting go of the second list. Don't try to suppress it. Just acknowledge it and place it somewhere outside your body, outside your brain. That act alone shifts the weight. Your nervous system calms, your breath returns, because your mind isn't built to hold every possible future. It's built to meet the present moment with wisdom. Carl Jung believed that peace came not from pushing things away, but from integrating them, seeing them clearly, understanding where they come from, and making room for them without letting them take over. Marcus Aurelius did the same. He didn't pretend to be fearless. He acknowledged his fear and then reminded himself that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward anyway. He didn't need certainty to find stillness. He just needed honesty and a willingness to act where he could. There's something deeply human in the way Marcus met his worries. He didn't always win. Some days he failed. Some entries show a man clearly frustrated, tired, disheartened. But he returned, again and again, to the discipline of the mind, to choosing his focus, to letting go of what had no solution in the moment. And that's the part we can take with us. Because we all face moments where the weight of uncertainty grows too loud, where the silence of night becomes a backdrop for worry. And in those moments, what we need isn't more thought. What we need is clarity. It starts with asking, is this mine to fix? If it is, then act. Even a small step will bring relief. If it isn't, then surrender. Not with apathy, but with acceptance. That's what the Stoics taught, not to be emotionless, but to be anchored. Even when storms roll in, especially then. There's humility in this practice, a quiet strength, a kind of wisdom that doesn't need to solve everything to feel at peace. It simply knows its limits and honors them. Marcus Aurelius didn't conquer every thought, but he refused to let the unsolvable ones run his life. That's the lesson he left behind, one that still whispers through the centuries. Focus on the space where your power lives. Let the rest go. And maybe that's enough for tonight. Not certainty, not perfection, just enough presence to choose what matters and release what doesn't. Just enough stillness to remember, you are not your worry. You are the one who decides what it means, and in that, even the most restless mind can begin to rest. There's something sacred about the way words settle on a page when the rest of the world has gone quiet. When the noise dies down and the distractions fall away, writing becomes more than just an outlet. It becomes a ritual, not in the religious sense, but in the deeply human sense. A practice that gently guides the mind out of chaos and into clarity. Even a few lines scribbled in a notebook before bed can carry more weight than 100 thoughts bouncing around in your head. Because writing, unlike thinking, has structure. It gives shape to what felt formless. It turns noise into language. It becomes a soft landing for the mental debris we carry all day. We don't usually realize how many unspoken things we hold on to until we sit still and try to put them into words. Worries, regrets, small resentments, things we wish we'd said differently. During the day, we push them down, numb them with productivity or noise. But at night, they rise. And if we don't do something with them, they just stay there, floating. Writing is the act of sitting down and saying, I see you. It doesn't demand that we solve anything. It just invites us to notice, to name, to release. Marcus Aurelius did this almost every night. His meditations weren't written for publication. They were written for survival, for sanity, for self-examination. He faced war, betrayal, the constant weight of leadership. And yet he returned to the page with honesty. He wrote not to impress others, but to remind himself of what mattered, of what was in his control, of who he wanted to be. And we can do the same. Not with long essays or perfect grammar, just a few sentences, just a moment to get honest before sleep. Carl Jung believed that what remains unconscious will shape your life until it is brought to awareness. That's exactly what journaling does. It's a mirror that shows you the patterns you were too busy to notice during the day. It reveals the thoughts that echo quietly in the background. Sometimes they're about fear, sometimes anger, sometimes longing, but all of them want the same thing: attention. And when you give them that, just by writing them down, you begin to reclaim your mind from the grip of unconscious reaction. The act doesn't need to be dramatic. You can start with something simple. Here's what felt heavy today. Or, what I keep thinking about tonight is. That small prompt opens the door, and once it's open, even for just 5 minutes, something begins to shift. The emotion that felt overwhelming becomes something you can observe. The thought that wouldn't let go becomes something you can hold, examine, and put down. You don't need to resolve it. You just need to give it a place to rest. Socrates taught that the unexamined life is not worth living. That doesn't mean we need to analyze every emotion or become experts in philosophy, but it does mean we benefit from reflection, from looking back, even briefly, and asking, did I live today the way I want to live? Writing is how we answer that question, not always with certainty, but with sincerity. When you write about your day, you create a kind of closure, like finishing a chapter, so your mind isn't stuck rereading the same lines all night. And writing also allows for gentleness. In our minds, we can be harsh. We criticize, we replay mistakes, we worry about things beyond our control. But on the page, there's an opportunity to shift that tone, to meet yourself with patience, to say, that was hard today, but I handled it. Or, I wasn't proud of that moment, but I learned something from it. That voice, the one that understands and forgives, becomes stronger the more we write. And the stronger it becomes, the easier it gets to sleep at night. Aristotle believed that virtue wasn't something you had, but something you practiced. That character was built through repeated actions. If you practice honesty, you become honest. If you practice reflection, you become wise. And that's what this writing ritual is about. Not just unloading emotions, but shaping who you are, one night at a time. It's in those small moments before sleep where you start becoming someone calmer, more grounded, more clear. Over time, this practice starts to leave a mark. You begin to recognize your own patterns. You catch yourself earlier when the mind spirals. You start to notice what triggers anxiety or what fills you with peace. You become more fluent in your inner language. And that fluency is powerful because when you understand yourself, you stop being so easily knocked off balance. You meet stress with resilience. You meet fear with perspective. And you meet yourself as you are, without judgment. Even when you don't know what to say, the act of putting pen to paper still helps. You can write a list. 3 things that felt good today. 3 things you're grateful for. 1 thing you want to do better tomorrow. You can write about the weather if that's all you've got, because what matters isn't the content, it's the attention. The ritual itself becomes a signal to your nervous system. The day is done, and now we slow down. Now we return. Plato once said that writing is a kind of remembering. And in these quiet moments, what we remember isn't just the events of the day, but the meaning inside them. The way a simple conversation lingered. The way a mistake revealed something you hadn't seen before. The way a quiet act of kindness softened your edges. These are the details that get lost if we never pause. Writing is how we catch them. It's how we honor them. And some nights, you'll notice something beautiful. You'll start to feel lighter after just a few words. The mind, which felt full just minutes ago, begins to soften. The body begins to relax. The world doesn't feel so loud anymore. Because you made space for reflection. Because you chose not to carry it all inside. That's the quiet power of this practice. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. but it's deeply transformative. It gives you back your breath. It turns your attention inward, where all the noise eventually settles. And in that space, you find peace. Not because everything is solved, but because everything has a place. Even the pain, even the uncertainty. It all finds room, and that room, created by your own hand, becomes a sanctuary. So write, even if it's just one sentence, one word. Make it a habit not because you have to, but because you deserve that moment of peace, that return to self. Let the page hold what you no longer need to carry, and as you close the notebook and lay your head down, know that you did something good for your mind tonight. You created stillness, you created clarity, you created peace, and you did it with nothing more than a pen, a little honesty, and the decision to meet yourself where you are. Overthinking wears many disguises. It can feel like preparation, like control, like intelligence. You tell yourself, if I just run through this one more time, I'll be ready. So you do, again and again. You replay the conversation, you reimagine the situation, you rehearse the future until it becomes a loop you can't turn off. But here's the truth. Overthinking isn't clarity. It's noise dressed up as strategy, and the more we indulge it, especially at night, the further we drift from peace. What we think is helping us prepare is often what's keeping us stuck. There's a quiet lie embedded in overthinking, the idea that if you think through every possible outcome, you'll avoid pain. That somehow by mentally rehearsing the worst, you'll soften its blow or even prevent it. But pain doesn't work that way. Life doesn't give you bonus points for worrying in advance. In fact, it usually subtracts from your present, because the moment you're in, the one where you could rest, reflect, breathe, is being hijacked by a future that doesn't even exist yet. Epictetus said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And if you've ever laid in bed rehearsing how someone might react, or replaying what you should have said hours ago, you know what he meant. The suffering isn't in the actual event, it's in the rehearsal. The brain's natural instinct is to scan for threats. That's what keeps us alive. But when left untrained, it turns that instinct inward. It becomes hyper-vigilant, always scanning, never arriving. And instead of protecting you, it ends up draining you. Carl Jung believed that what you resist persists. And overthinking is, at its core, a kind of resistance, a refusal to trust the unknown. It's the mind's way of saying, I'm not ready to let go. But the irony is that letting go isn't the end of preparation. It's the beginning of real clarity. Because when you stop obsessively rehearsing, you finally give your attention to what's here. And what's here, right now, is the only place you can actually make a difference. There's no certainty in life. Even the Stoics, with all their wisdom, understood that deeply. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations to make life predictable. He wrote them to make peace with unpredictability. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, he said, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Overthinking inflates our estimates. It makes problems feel bigger than they are. It makes us feel smaller than we are. And the only way to shrink the fear back to its real size is to return to presence. Presence doesn't mean ignoring the future. It means acknowledging it without becoming consumed by it. When you ground yourself in the now, in the feel of your breath, the weight of your body, the softness of the night, you teach your mind to rest. You give it something real to hold on to, because the future, no matter how vivid your imagination, is always fiction until it arrives. And the past, it's already gone. What remains is this moment, and this moment is always manageable, even when it isn't easy. Aristotle said that the energy of the mind is the essence of life. Where you place that energy shapes not just your mood, but your character. Overthinking spreads that energy thin. It scatters it across timelines and worries, making it harder to take action, to focus, to sleep. But when you draw that energy inward, when you say, "What can I actually do now?" something changes. You shift from reaction to intention. You stop rehearsing life and start engaging with it. And let's be honest, most of what we overthink never happens. You've lived long enough to know that. Most of your imagined catastrophes never come true, and the ones that do, they don't feel like you imagined anyway. Because reality has texture, it has shape and nuance. It forces you to rise in ways that your late-night predictions could never have prepared you for. That's why presence is so powerful, because it teaches you to meet life where it is, not where your fears project it to be. Socrates said that the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. That's not defeatist, that's freedom. When you stop trying to anticipate every twist, you get to show up with curiosity instead of fear. You get to listen instead of assume. You get to sleep instead of spiral. It's not that the future doesn't matter, it's that you can't live it now. And if you can't live it now, you don't need to carry its weight now. There's also a kind of emotional honesty in presence that overthinking avoids. Overthinking gives the illusion of doing something, but it often masks what we're unwilling to feel: fear, shame, powerlessness. These emotions can't be thought through, they have to be felt. And ironically, when you stop running from them, they tend to soften. Writing helps, breathing helps, even silence helps. Because in those moments, you're not feeding the loop, you're stepping out of it. Plato described the mind as a charioteer pulled by two horses, one driven by reason, the other by emotion. When those two forces are in conflict, the chariot veers. Overthinking is what happens when reason tries to overpower emotion instead of understanding it. The goal isn't to shut off emotion or ignore logic. It's to guide both with awareness, and awareness begins in the present, not in the imagined future, but in the felt experience of now. You don't need to stop thinking altogether, you just need to notice when thinking turns into looping, when the same thought has passed through your head 5, 10, 20 times. It's no longer helping, it's become a form of control. And control, as the Stoics remind us, is almost always an illusion. What you can control is your breath, your posture, your response, your attention. And when you bring your attention back to those things, you reclaim your peace. Peace isn't passive, it's active. It's a choice made again and again to meet this moment with your full presence. Not to escape what might happen, but to be anchored in what is happening. To say, "This is enough for now." That doesn't mean giving up on your plans or ignoring reality. It means refusing to be ruled by the what-ifs. Because your strength doesn't come from guessing right. It comes from showing up with clarity, no matter what comes. So tonight, instead of rehearsing a future you can't predict, return to the present you can influence. Breathe, write, sit still. Let your mind be here. Let your thoughts pass without gripping them. You don't need to solve everything to rest. You just need to stop pretending that worry is a form of wisdom. It's not. Presence is. And you have access to that, not tomorrow, not someday, but right now. When your mind won't stop spinning, when thoughts collide and race and spiral with no clear destination, your breath is still there, steady, patient, unaffected by the stories in your head. Stoicism, at its core, isn't just a mental framework. It's a way of being in your body. The Stoics knew that the mind and body are not separate. They believed that how we hold ourselves, how we breathe, how we move, all of it shapes how we think and feel. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor philosopher, constantly reminded himself to return to his breath, to ground his reason in what he could control, not in the chaos around him, but in the calm within. There's something simple, even humble, about breathing. It doesn't ask much. You don't have to be enlightened or perfect to do it. You just have to stop, pay attention, inhale, exhale, and yet in those few seconds you return to something ancient and powerful. Your breath becomes a signal, not just to your body, but to your nervous system. A slow breath tells your body, it's safe. You don't need to run, to rehearse, to fix anything right now. This is the opposite of panic. This is presence. Aristotle once said, "The soul never thinks without a picture, but before the picture there is breath." Breath is the foundation of awareness, the invisible current that carries your attention. When you feel like you're drowning in thought, the breath is a lifeline. You follow it down, past the noise, into the rhythm of your own being. The Stoics taught that you don't fight the storm by shouting at it, you stand still and steady yourself against it. Your breath is that stillness. It's your anchor when the waves rise. Think about how the body responds to stress. The heart speeds up, the shoulders tense, breathing becomes shallow and quick. These aren't random reactions, they're signals. Your body is trying to tell you something. And instead of ignoring it, Stoicism invites you to listen, to work with the body, not against it. Epictetus reminded us that some things are within our control, and some things are not. The breath, that's yours. You don't need permission to slow down. You don't need the world to calm down before you do. Carl Jung spoke often about integration, about the need to bring the unconscious into the light. One of the most direct ways to begin that process is through the body. The breath is not symbolic, it is literal, and yet it holds meaning. When you start breathing slowly, intentionally, you create a pause. And in that pause, thoughts lose their grip. They don't disappear, but they lose their urgency. You see them more clearly, and in seeing them clearly, you remember something important. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer, the one behind the screen. Socrates believed that the body must be trained alongside the soul, not as a vanity project, but as a practice of discipline and clarity. The Stoics weren't detached intellectuals floating above the physical world. They trained, they walked, they fasted, they breathed, because they knew that the way we live in our bodies reflects and affects the way we live in our minds. When your breath is shallow and tight, your thoughts are likely to follow. When your breath deepens, your awareness expands. There's a reason meditation, yoga, even ancient battle rituals all center around breath. It brings coherence. It brings you back. Breathing also reconnects you to time. Most anxiety lives in the future. Most regret lives in the past. But the breath, it's only ever here. Now it won't follow you into tomorrow. It doesn't cling to yesterday. When you focus on your breath, you align with the present moment, and that's where all your actual power is. You can't take meaningful action tomorrow if you're paralyzed today. You can't solve a problem when your nervous system thinks you're under attack. The breath reminds your body that you're not, that you are safe enough to reflect, to feel, to think clearly. Even in philosophy, where the emphasis often seems to be on reason and logic, the Stoics grounded their wisdom in lived experience. Marcus Aurelius didn't just write about stillness. He practiced it through breath and posture and habit. His journal is filled with reminders to return to yourself, to stand firm like a rock. And these weren't metaphors, they were physical instructions. Your body speaks the language of presence long before the mind catches up. That's why breathing isn't a backup plan. It's the primary one. When you notice your thoughts becoming frantic or scattered, when the weight of your day starts pressing down at night, the solution isn't always thinking through it harder. Sometimes it's closing your eyes and taking 3 slow breaths. That's it. That's the reset. That's the moment the spiral slows, and the space between thoughts opens up just enough for clarity to step in. It's not magic, it's physiology meeting philosophy. The Stoics would have understood the science too, if they'd had access to it. They would have appreciated the studies showing how slow, deep breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of us responsible for calm and healing, because they already lived it. They already saw that the path to inner peace wasn't through control, but through cooperation with nature, with life, and with yourself. And your breath is the most natural part of you. It arrives without asking. It leaves without effort. And in between, it's your most direct path home. When you can't think straight, breathe straight. When you feel overwhelmed, let your breath be your first response. Let it remind you that you are not behind, not broken, not bound by the story your mind is spinning. You are here, fully, and that's enough. That's where peace begins. Not in the next answer, not in the perfect routine, but in one quiet inhale followed by one slower exhale. Again and again, until the mind remembers that it doesn't have to carry everything alone. Even as you lie in bed, feeling the tension in your chest or the restlessness in your legs, your breath remains steady, soft, waiting. Let it be the first thing you return to when the night feels too loud. Let it guide you away from rumination and into rhythm. Let it pull you back from the edge of spiraling thought. Because no matter how far your mind travels, your breath is always there, calling you home, to presence, to peace, to yourself. Gratitude has a reputation problem. Too often it's packaged as a cliché, something fluffy, decorative, like a motivational poster you hang on the wall, but never really absorb, and because of that, people dismiss it. But the kind of gratitude that truly matters, the kind that Stoics spoke of and practiced, isn't about forcing positivity or pretending that life is always beautiful. It's about training your attention, deliberately, purposefully, especially when your mind wants to spiral into the darkness of everything that feels missing, wrong, or uncertain. Because that's when it matters most, not when things are going well, but when they're not. There's a point in the evening for many people when the world gets quiet, but the mind doesn't. When the body is ready for rest, but the thoughts start pacing. That's when the mind starts reaching for the conversation that didn't sit right, the mistake you made 5 years ago, the future you still can't predict. And in that chaos, gratitude becomes a kind of mental posture, a way of turning your head gently toward what is here, not to deny the worries, but to loosen their grip. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." Gratitude in this light isn't resistance, it's redirection. It's choosing to shine a light on something real that you can hold, even if everything else feels unsteady. And it doesn't take much, just a breath, a pause, and a question. What is good right now? Not perfect, not flashy, just good. It could be the comfort of the pillow beneath your head, the fact that your heart keeps beating without you asking, the sound of quiet in a room that's finally still. These aren't throwaway details, they're the scaffolding of presence, and the Stoics knew that presence was the only real antidote to anxiety. Seneca wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future." Gratitude trains you to do exactly that, not by force, but through gentle awareness. The act of noticing what's good is also the act of pulling your mind out of the spiral. A spiral is, by nature, a loop. It feeds on momentum. One thought spins into another, and before you know it, you're 10 layers deep into imaginary scenarios and impossible standards. Gratitude interrupts that loop. It stops the spin, even for a moment, by offering you something else to hold, something grounded, something that doesn't need to be fixed or changed or predicted, just appreciated. Plato spoke of the soul's nourishment as a return to what is good, true, and beautiful. And while that may sound lofty, it can also be incredibly simple. What is good in this moment? What has remained despite everything else? Gratitude isn't a denial of what's hard. It's a refusal to let the hard things consume everything. It's a decision to include what's beautiful, no matter how small, in the final picture of your day. The reason this works, and it does work, isn't just philosophical, it's physiological. When you focus on gratitude, your brain releases dopamine and serotonin, chemicals that help calm the nervous system. It's not about pretending everything is fine. It's about giving your body a chance to step out of fight or flight mode, a chance to rest. That's why a nightly gratitude practice isn't fluff. It's maintenance for your mind, your mood, and your sense of self. Socrates once suggested that an unexamined life is not worth living, but there's a flip side. A constantly self-criticized life isn't peaceful either. Many people review their day with a spotlight on what went wrong, the comment they shouldn't have made, the task they didn't finish, the feeling they couldn't shake. And yes, reflection is important, but if it's not balanced by acknowledgement of what went right, even if it's just the effort you made to show up, it becomes punishment, not growth. Gratitude brings balance. It allows you to see the full picture, not just the parts you want to critique. Aristotle spoke of eudaimonia, a state of flourishing, of living in alignment with one's highest values. Gratitude, when practiced intentionally, is a bridge to that state. It helps you see the alignment that's already happening, the quiet ways you're living your values even in small, unglamorous moments. Maybe you offered someone kindness when you were tired. Maybe you paused before reacting with anger. Maybe you simply endured a hard day without letting it harden you. These are wins, and they deserve to be named. Writing them down, even if it's just 3 lines before bed, gives them weight. It tells your brain, this matters. This is what we're choosing to remember. And that choice, repeated night after night, reshapes how you meet your days. Not by turning you into a blindly optimistic person, but by training your mind to recognize what's steady and whole, even when the surface feels turbulent. Carl Jung also said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Gratitude helps you make your attention conscious. It makes you aware of where you place your focus and why. And over time, that awareness builds trust in yourself, in your ability to hold discomfort and still see beauty, in your ability to reflect without spiraling. This is not spiritual fluff. This is emotional strength. The Stoics didn't write about gratitude as a list-making exercise. They wrote about it as a discipline. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily of the things he took for granted, not to feel better, but to feel connected to life, to people, to the present moment. He wrote, "Do not indulge in dreams of having what you have not, but reckon up the chief of the blessings you do possess." That's gratitude, not the denial of longing, but the recognition of enough. Enough. That's the quiet gift of this practice. When your mind starts whispering that you haven't done enough, haven't become enough, haven't solved enough, gratitude lets you say, maybe, but I have this. And sometimes that's the difference between restlessness and rest, between spiraling and surrender. Gratitude doesn't make the hard things disappear, but it does remind you that they're not the only things. So as the day winds down and your thoughts start looking for somewhere to land, give them a softer place to rest. Let them land on what you've appreciated. What made you smile? What held you up? Not to ignore the pain, but to give equal weight to the peace. That's balance. That's wisdom. That's Stoicism in practice, not just in theory. And it starts with a simple pause, a breath, and a question. What do I have right now that I didn't notice before? That answer, whatever it is your anchor. Hold it. Let it pull you back from the spiral. Let it bring you into the quiet strength of presence. Let it remind you that even now, especially now, there is something worth being thankful for. Not as decoration, but as medicine, as clarity, as truth. There's a quiet wisdom in simplicity that the Stoics understood long before minimalism became a trend. They didn't speak of simplicity in terms of aesthetics or design choices, but as a way of life, a kind of emotional and mental clarity that begins in your surroundings and seeps inward. And nowhere is that more evident than in the hours before sleep. The Stoics believed that what fills our space often reflects what fills our mind. And when the day ends, when distractions fade and the world gets still, the clutter we ignored all day starts to echo. Physical clutter, yes, the things left undone, the disorganized space around us, but also the emotional clutter we carry, unspoken worries, unprocessed tension, unresolved thoughts that hang in the air like dust. Seneca wrote, "If you live in harmony with nature, you will never be poor. If you live according to what others think, you will never be rich." And part of that harmony, he believed, came from living simply, not in deprivation, but in clarity, not because you can't have more, but because more isn't always better, especially at night, because the mind, like the body, needs room to stretch, room to breathe, and clutter, in any form, tightens that space. It closes in, it overwhelms. That's why so many of us feel mentally crowded as soon as we lay down, because we haven't made room for rest. Simplicity isn't sterile, it's not cold, it's calm. A room that's quiet, with dim light and soft textures, has a different kind of conversation with your nervous system. It says you're safe. There's nothing to fix right now, nothing to chase. And the Stoics, practical as they were, would see this not as luxury, but as wisdom, as preparation. You don't walk into rest the same way you walk into a meeting or scroll into sleep. You arrive slowly, intentionally. You let the outer world mirror the inner one you want to create. Plato once taught that the first and best victory is to conquer self. But to do that, you must first quiet the noise. And often, the simplest path to that quiet starts with your space. What are you holding on to that adds nothing but weight? That doesn't bring meaning or peace. That distracts rather than anchors. It could be a pile of clothes, or a to-do list scribbled on 5 sticky notes, or even an old resentment that you keep dusting off. Simplicity is a kind of self-honesty, a choice to stop surrounding yourself with things that don't serve the life you want to build. Carl Jung spoke often about the need to bring order to the unconscious, and while he focused on dreams and archetypes, the same applies to our environment. External chaos is often a mirror of internal disorder, and when we strip things down, even just a little, we create room for insight. The bed becomes a place to rest, not to ruminate. The night becomes an invitation to reflect, not react. It's not about perfection. It's about removing what blocks the stillness you crave. The Stoics would have appreciated the ritual of preparing a space for sleep. Not as performance, but as practice, a form of respect. Turn off the unnecessary light, close the laptop, set the phone down. These aren't just habits, they're signals. They tell your mind, the day is done. And in that closure, there is peace. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world at one point, reminded himself nightly that simplicity wasn't weakness, but strength. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. And part of that way of thinking was shaped by what he chose to let go of. Simplicity, then, becomes a kind of boundary, a way of protecting your peace from the world's noise. Because not everything needs to be answered tonight. Not every problem needs solving before morning. And often, when you remove what's unnecessary, what truly matters becomes visible. That's the heart of Stoic thought, the essential over the excessive, the meaningful over the many. At night, when your thoughts try to multiply, simplicity brings them back to one, this moment, this breath, this space. Think about how differently your nervous system reacts in a clean, quiet room compared to one filled with clutter, noise, or stimulation. It's not just about taste, it's about regulation. Your body takes cues from your environment. When the space around you calms down, your body follows. That's why the Stoics emphasize simplicity, not just in philosophy, but in lifestyle. They knew that serenity isn't stumbled upon, it's cultivated, one choice at a time. Socrates was famous for living simply, not because he couldn't acquire things, but because he believed they weren't necessary for the kind of life he valued. He said, "He is richest who is content with the least." And while that may sound extreme to modern ears, there's truth there. Especially before sleep, when more stimulation, more input, more distraction doesn't help, it harms. Simplifying your space before bed is not about being minimalist for the sake of it. It's about creating a kind of sanctuary, a space where your mind can soften, where your thoughts can breathe without being buried. This extends to the emotional space too. Letting go of the day's excess doesn't just mean turning off the lights. It means putting down the stories you don't need to carry into tomorrow. The arguments you've replayed 5 times already, the expectations you didn't meet, the tasks left undone. Simplicity at night is about release. Not because you don't care, but because caring too much, too late, turns into self-punishment. And the Stoics taught that you meet life better when you're rested, not restless. Seneca warned about the trap of busyness, how it becomes its own form of distraction. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And how much of that waste comes from unnecessary mental clutter. Simplicity doesn't mean everything is perfect. It just means everything that remains has a purpose. And at night, the purpose is rest. That's it. You don't need answers. You need room. You need quiet. You need fewer reasons to keep your mind awake. Letting go of excess is not a loss. It's a return to what matters, to what helps, to what heals. When you simplify, you're not shrinking your world. You're making space for the parts that count. And as the Stoics believed, peace isn't about avoiding life. It's about learning how to live it with less noise, with clearer eyes, with a lighter heart. And that starts with what you choose to surround yourself with when the world finally goes quiet. Simplicity in that moment is not a design choice. It's a way of saying to your mind, you're safe now. You can let go. You can rest. There's a strange kind of shame that creeps in when your mind refuses to settle. You lie there in the dark, exhausted but wide awake, and the thoughts keep turning. Memories, plans, regrets, fears, all jumbled together in a restless loop. And somewhere in that noise, a quiet accusation starts to whisper, "Why can't you just calm down? Why can't you sleep like everyone else?" That inner voice makes restlessness feel like failure, like weakness. But it's not. And the Stoics, the same thinkers who've inspired warriors, leaders, and everyday people for centuries, they knew this. They understood that the human mind, even at its most trained and disciplined, is not immune to turbulence. It's part of being alive. And the presence of restlessness isn't a flaw in your character. It's a signal that you are, in fact, human. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who ruled Rome during one of its most difficult periods, wrote in his private journals about the very same feeling, the weight of a restless mind. He struggled with thoughts that wouldn't stop, worries about duty, justice, mortality. He once wrote, "The mind that is anxious about future events is miserable." But notice what he didn't say. He didn't say it's broken. He didn't say it should be silenced with force. He simply observed it, named it, accepted it. Restlessness wasn't his enemy. It was part of the terrain he had to learn to move through with clarity. That's one of the core principles of Stoic thought, to see things as they are, not worse than they are, not through a lens of shame, but with calm honesty. The mind wanders, the body tires, the emotions rise. All of that is natural, all of that is human. Even Socrates, the great teacher who challenged Athens to think deeper, often wandered through hours of silence, reflecting deeply, questioning endlessly. He never claimed the goal was to rid oneself of all unrest, only to understand it better. He believed wisdom began with admitting what we don't yet know, and that includes why we sometimes feel so unsettled. There's a certain freedom in that idea, isn't there? That you're not alone in the tossing and turning, that the ones we consider wise, the philosophers, the rulers, the teachers, they too sat in their thoughts, often overwhelmed by them. Carl Jung put it plainly, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness." He saw the human mind not as something to perfect, but something to meet with respect and curiosity. And the restlessness, that was a shadow, not evil, but misunderstood, something that rises when parts of the self need attention, not rejection. What the Stoics would remind us is that restlessness isn't a problem to solve with force. It's a signal to listen to with patience. It might mean there's something unresolved, something you've been pushing down all day now, demanding to be acknowledged. Or it might mean nothing at all, just the nervous energy of living in a complicated world. In either case, judging it makes it worse. Accepting it makes it manageable. We often confuse stillness with silence, but they're not the same. Stillness isn't the absence of thought. It's the presence of perspective. You can be filled with thoughts and still be grounded. You can feel a wave of anxiety and still be okay. That's the reframe. That's the shift the Stoics invite us into. They didn't say, "Don't feel." They said, "Feel," and learn to navigate it. Aristotle spoke of finding balance, the golden mean between extremes. Not too much, not too little. Courage, he said, sits between fear and recklessness. Peace might sit somewhere between chaos and denial. If you're restless, it may not mean something's wrong. It might mean you're in motion, emotionally, psychologically, even if your body is still. And that's not a fault. That's the current of being alive, moving through you. The problem isn't restlessness itself, it's the story we attach to it. This means I'm failing. This means I'm weak. This means I'm broken. But what if it doesn't mean that? What if it simply means your system, body, mind, heart, is processing? What if the goal tonight isn't to eliminate that energy, but to meet it differently, to soften around it, to observe it, to breathe with it? That's where the Stoics were ahead of their time. They understood that much of our suffering comes not from the experience itself, but from the resistance to it. Epictetus said, "We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment about them." So when restlessness shows up and we label it as failure, we double our suffering. But when we see it simply as movement, a natural part of the human rhythm, we give ourselves room to settle without force, room to be okay even when we're not calm yet. There's a quiet kind of strength in this, not the loud, confident kind we're used to seeing celebrated, but a deeper kind, the strength to sit in discomfort without rushing to escape it, the strength to acknowledge the racing thoughts and not let them define your worth, the strength to say, "This too is part of the night." The Stoics believed that character is shaped not in moments of ease, but in how we face the things we can't immediately fix. And restlessness is one of those things. It's a visitor. It doesn't respond well to being forced out. But if you make space for it, if you treat it like something familiar rather than foreign, it often loosens its grip. The same way a storm doesn't last forever, even when it feels like it will. So next time your mind won't settle, remember this. You're not doing something wrong. You're experiencing what people have always experienced. Even the wise, even the strong, even the quiet ones. You're not failing, you're feeling. And if you can see restlessness not as a sign of weakness, but as part of the process, it starts to lose its sting. You start to soften, you start to breathe, and eventually, gently, you begin to rest. Not in the absence of thought, but in the acceptance of it. The Stoics would call that wisdom. And maybe, tonight, that's enough. There's a certain heaviness that builds when your worries blur into one another, vague, shapeless, but persistent. They don't line up neatly or wait their turn. They pile on, one after the other, until it feels like you're carrying things that don't even belong to you. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe the weight we feel at night isn't just from our responsibilities. It's from all the things we've collected in our minds that were never really ours to hold. The Stoics had a remedy for this kind of emotional clutter, a clear, grounded thought experiment known as the dichotomy of control. And it still works today. When Epictetus said, "Some things are in our control and others not," he wasn't making a casual observation. He was offering a kind of inner compass, a way to sift through the mental storm and sort out what's real, what's yours, and what isn't. It sounds simple, almost too simple. But that's the beauty of it. Simplicity, when it cuts through chaos, becomes a form of clarity. It lets you see with new eyes. So here's the experiment. When your mind starts racing, when you're buried under looping thoughts and unfinished conversations, pause. Not to stop the thoughts, that's not the goal, but to observe them with gentleness and distance. Imagine laying them out one by one, not to judge, but to ask a single question. Is this within my control or isn't it? The answer isn't always obvious at first, but when you really look, it becomes clear. That strange look someone gave you earlier, out of your control. The weather tomorrow, out of your control. Your reaction to that look, your preparation for the rain, that's yours. It's subtle, but transformative. Suddenly, the field of worry shrinks, not because you forced it, but because you filtered it. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." And he was right. When we fight every worry as if it's our job to solve it all, we give it power. But when we simply sort them, like items in a drawer, we reclaim that power. We don't need to hold what doesn't belong to us. In doing so, we create space in the mind. Not silence necessarily, but room to breathe, room to think clearly. There's something deeply human in this process, to want to carry everything, to believe that if we worry about something hard enough, maybe we'll stop it from happening. That's the illusion. That worry equals preparation. But Stoicism calls that out. It reminds us that worry without action is just noise, and noise exhausts us. Action, on the other hand, grounds us. That's why this practice isn't just about letting go. It's also about stepping up. Once you've set aside the things you can't control, what remains are the things you can, your thoughts, your actions, your next step, and those matter. They're not small, they're the foundation of your peace. The Stoics didn't preach passivity. They weren't saying, do nothing. They were saying, do what's yours to do, and nothing more. Plato wrote about the importance of order in the soul. That disorder in the mind creates suffering, And what is cluttered thought, if not disorder? When we let worries bleed into every corner of our mind, we lose that inner order. But the moment we begin to name, to sort, to place, we start to restore that balance, not with force, but with awareness. Think of it like this: your mind is a room, and every worry is an object in that room. Some of those objects are yours, your responsibilities, your values, your actions. Others are things you picked up without realizing, other people's expectations, tomorrow's unknowns, yesterday's mistakes. They don't belong here. So what happens if you start clearing the room, not to make it empty, just to make it livable, peaceful, yours? This is where self-compassion enters the picture, because it's easy to feel ashamed of how much space worry takes up. Easy to say, I should be stronger, or I should have let this go by now. But that mindset only adds to the weight. Socrates believed that self-awareness was the beginning of wisdom, but he never said it had to come with self-judgment. Awareness is not about shame, it's about truth. And the truth is, you've been carrying too much. The truth is, it's okay to set some of it down. Sometimes all it takes is a single act of clarity. Writing down your thoughts, drawing 2 columns, what I control and what I don't, not to create perfection, just to practice perspective. It's strange how such a small ritual can shift your entire state of mind. But it does. It takes thoughts out of the fog and puts them where you can see them. And when you see clearly, you start to feel differently. Lighter, not empty, just unburdened. This isn't a one-time fix. It's a daily practice, a gentle sorting of the soul. Because life doesn't stop handing you new worries. But the more you practice this experiment, the quicker you become at recognizing what's yours and what isn't. And slowly your mind starts to trust that it doesn't have to hold everything all at once. That you're allowed to rest, that you're allowed to release. Aristotle believed that true freedom comes from living in alignment with reason. And what could be more reasonable than choosing not to fight battles you cannot win? The worry that lingers in the night. It often pretends to be urgent. But when seen in the soft light of reason, much of it dissolves. You begin to notice what actually requires your energy and what just steals it. And in that noticing, you begin to recover your strength. So when the thoughts rise tonight, and they will, try this. Don't chase them. Don't fight them. Just look at them. Place them gently into one of 2 spaces, and know that the ones outside your control don't require your sacrifice. They only ask for your release. That small act of choice, that's where your power lives. Not in knowing all the answers, but in knowing what's yours to carry, and what, kindly, you can now let go. Rest was never a luxury to the Stoics. It wasn't seen as an escape from effort or a reward for survival. It was preparation, a sacred, quiet interval between moments of engagement with the world. This is a difficult shift for us to make, especially in a culture that treats exhaustion like a badge of honor and views rest as indulgence or even laziness. But the Stoics were wiser than that. They saw sleep not as the absence of doing, but as part of the discipline of living. Seneca wrote, "We should give as much care to the end of the day as to its beginning, not because it was time to shut down, but because that stillness was part of the rhythm of strength." When we lie down at night, the mind doesn't stop just because the body does. It starts whispering all the things we forgot to finish, all the versions of ourselves we feel we should have been. This isn't weakness, it's friction, the collision of effort and self-expectation. And yet the Stoics would urge us to reframe that chaos not as failure, but as signal, a sign that the system is overburdened, that even warriors must sharpen the sword, not swing it endlessly. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, wrote in his Meditations, "If you seek tranquility, do less. Not do nothing, just do what matters, and rest is part of what matters. Rest prepares the mind in the same way training prepares the body, not through absence, but through structure. A restful mind is a ready mind, and readiness in Stoicism is essential. It's not just about being alert, it's about being composed, calm enough to see clearly, strong enough to act wisely. When you skip rest, you rob tomorrow of your best. And the Stoics knew the danger in that. They believed that nothing should be wasted, not time, not thought, not energy. So if rest can renew those resources, then rest is not optional, it is your responsibility. Carl Jung believed that what you ignore in your waking life will visit you in your dreams. What the Stoics taught, and Jung later echoed, is that rest isn't just for the body, it's also for the processing of emotion, thought, conflict. At night, the things we've pushed aside during the day rise to the surface. That's not a flaw in the design, that's the design. It's the mind's attempt to balance the account, to restore order. And if you meet that moment with resistance, if you treat rest as a thing you must earn or guilt trip your way into, it only adds pressure. But if you see it as a strategic pause, one that clears the fog and strengthens resolve, then sleep becomes something deeper than a break. It becomes part of your practice. Plato once said, "The part can never be well unless the whole is well," and that's the paradox of how we treat rest today. We try to be mentally sharp while physically exhausted, emotionally available while spiritually depleted. The Stoics didn't separate these things. To them, wellness was wholeness, and wholeness required rest, not as a reward, but as a rhythm, like breath. Inhale, effort, exhale, rest. Neither one optional, both essential. There's also a kind of humility in rest that Stoicism respects. It's a moment of surrender, not of defeat, but of self-awareness. To say, "I cannot go on like this," is not weakness, it is wisdom. It's the refusal to burn yourself out chasing perfection. Aristotle said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And what better way to know yourself than in those quiet moments before sleep, when you finally hear what the noise of the day drowned out. In that stillness, you see what you've ignored, what you've feared, what you need. And those insights don't arrive while you're charging forward. They arrive when you stop. It's not just that the Stoics allowed for rest, they advocated for it. Because they knew what came next, that tomorrow would test your patience, that people would challenge your calm, that failure would tempt your ego. And what good are Stoic principles if your nervous system is too exhausted to apply them? Rest is not a retreat from the path. It is part of the path. It is where the mind rehearses virtue in silence, where the soul takes inventory and lays down what it cannot carry into another day. Rest is where philosophy stops being theory and starts becoming lived. And maybe that's what we've missed. That rest is not passive. It is active peace. It's the moment where the body resets, the mind recalibrates, and the heart gets quiet enough to feel what's real. The Stoics were not about escapism. They didn't say, "Don't feel." They said, "Don't be ruled by what you feel." And how can you even know what rules you if you never pause to reflect? This is why rest isn't punishment. It isn't a time-out handed to you by the universe for failing to do more. It's preparation for doing what matters. Better, deeper, cleaner. It's where the dust settles, where thoughts slow, where the next day's strength begins. Even in silence, the Stoics knew there is motion. Even in stillness, there is power. So if you've been telling yourself that you can't rest until you've earned it, consider this. Rest isn't something you buy with productivity. It's the foundation that productivity is built on. It's not a break from life. It's where life is restored. And when you treat it that way, something changes. You stop racing the clock. You stop measuring your worth by exhaustion. You start listening. You start noticing. You start preparing. Because when tomorrow comes, and it will, you'll need everything you've gathered tonight. The clarity, the calm, the quiet strength of someone who isn't running, but ready. And if that's not Stoic, what is? There's something about the silence of night that makes you remember how temporary everything is. The laughter from earlier, the tension from an argument, the little wins or missteps, they all fade into a kind of stillness that asks a different question. What actually matters right now? And often we don't like the answer, because so much of our worry, our rushing, our reaching, turns out to be noise, loud in the moment, but meaningless when held against the backdrop of impermanence. The Stoics understood this deeply. Memento mori, they whispered, not to frighten, but to remind. Remember you must die, not in a grim way, but in the way that makes everything else clearer. Carl Jung said that life is a short pause between two great mysteries, and in that pause, we spend so much time chasing permanence, wanting people to stay, projects to succeed, moments to last. But the truth is, nothing does. Not even the emotions that feel overwhelming right now. And while that can sound depressing at first, it's actually where freedom begins. Because when you stop clinging to what you can't keep, you start holding gently what's here. You start realizing that peace doesn't come from control, it comes from perspective. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think," he wasn't urging despair. He was pointing us toward focus. He knew that if you carried that awareness, not in panic, but in quiet humility, you'd waste less time. You'd argue less over things that won't matter a year from now. You'd let go of the need to win, to be right, to chase everything at once. Because when you remember the limits of your time, you use it better. At night, this truth settles in naturally. The world slows, distractions disappear, and you're left with your mind. And what the mind brings up in those moments, regrets, fears, old stories, are usually rooted in the illusion of permanence, that something should have lasted, that something must be fixed, that you should be more, or have more, or know more by now. But the Stoics would ask, compared to what? Compared to whom? Time humbles us all. Seneca reminded us that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And a lot of that waste comes from obsessing over the unimportant, from giving energy to things that crumble under the weight of time. When you reflect on impermanence with gentleness, something opens. You start to see the day not as a blur of duties and reactions, but as a collection of moments. Some worth keeping, some worth letting go. You remember that the people you love won't be here forever, so you soften your tone. You recall that today's mistake will fade, so you stop replaying it. You realize that the pressure to have it all figured out is a game nobody ever wins. Plato once wrote that the greatest wealth is to live content with little. And contentment comes easier when you're not trying to outlast time, but walk with it. This kind of reflection doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't require candlelit rituals or long journaling sessions. Sometimes it's as simple as noticing the sky, the way the light shifts, the way your breath slows without trying. It's the act of remembering that this moment is already slipping through your fingers, and instead of gripping harder, you relax. You stop needing to fill every silence. You stop trying to make every thought productive. Because rest, too, is sacred when you realize how fleeting the chance to feel it really is. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is not worth living, but the Stoics might add that an over-examined one becomes paralyzing. Reflection isn't about guilt-tripping yourself for every decision. It's about cutting through the clutter of what doesn't matter. It's about asking, quietly, what part of this can I release? What anxiety is just noise? What tension am I carrying because I forgot I don't have to? There's a kind of calm that arrives when you accept that not everything is yours to solve, that not every tension needs tightening, that not every fear needs fixing. Epictetus put it plainly, some things are up to us and some things are not. And when you sit with that, not just agree with it in theory but really live it, it makes you lighter. You stop chasing outcomes as if they define you. You stop fearing endings as if they undo everything that came before. And it's funny how much of what keeps us awake at night has to do with things we won't even remember when we're older. The embarrassing text, the missed opportunity, the thing we said wrong. All of it feels like a permanent mark until we remember how quickly everything moves. Time erodes even the sharpest memories. What lasts is how we carried ourselves, how present we were, how often we chose peace when we could have picked chaos. There's no need to fear the fact that life ends. What's worth fearing is a life never truly lived. One spent postponing joy, holding grudges, staying busy to avoid silence. But in the quiet moments, when you let go, when you breathe deep, when you simply are, that's where life happens. And that's where the Stoics invite us to return, not to escape life's impermanence, but to embrace it. Because when you remember that you'll lose everything, you learn how to love it better. When you realize that you don't get to repeat today, you start choosing more carefully what fills it. And when you finally understand that your thoughts, your worries, your stories are temporary, you get to decide which ones are worth keeping. So maybe tonight, instead of racing towards sleep or rehearsing tomorrow, you let that awareness settle, softly. Not with fear, but with peace. Memento mori. Not a warning, a gift. A reminder to live fully, let go gently and rest deeply. Because this moment, right here, right now, is already enough. There's a certain kind of peace that only nature knows how to offer. The quiet pulse of the sea, the endless stretch of sky, the slow movement of clouds across a fading sunset. The Stoics weren't just thinkers, they were observers. They looked outward as often as inward, not because they were escaping their minds, but because they knew the world beyond us has a way of steadying what's within us. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, still found comfort in the stars. "Dwell on the beauty of life," he wrote. "Watch the stars and see yourself running with them." That wasn't a poetic suggestion. It was a prescription, a way to return to stillness when the mind felt too full, too scattered, too small. Modern science catches up to this slowly. We now know that staring at natural scenes, trees moving in the wind, waves rising and falling, activates the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the part of us that slows the heartbeat, lowers the breath, tells the body, "You're safe now." But the Stoics didn't have brain scans or studies. What they had was awareness. They noticed that nature doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It simply flows. The river doesn't argue with the rocks. The wind doesn't need permission to move through the branches. The stars don't explain why they shine. They just do. And the closer we are to that rhythm, the more we remember something we tend to forget. We belong to it too. Carl Jung once said, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." Nature is made of meaning. A leaf falling isn't just a leaf, it's a lesson in letting go. A storm isn't just weather, it's proof that chaos comes and goes. These aren't metaphors, they're reminders. They show us what it looks like to exist without clinging. And that's something we forget when our thoughts spiral in the dark. When we think we need to fix everything, figure everything out, solve what's unsolvable before we sleep. But a tree doesn't overthink autumn. The tide doesn't rehearse how to return. That kind of acceptance, the letting be, the letting go, it softens something tight inside of us. There's a reason people walk outside to calm down, why our breath slows near water, why stars make us quiet without even trying. The Stoics believed that this connection wasn't random, it was essential. Seneca said, "We are part of the whole, as limbs to a body, not above nature, not separate, not masters of it, but participants in it. So when life feels overwhelming, when the mind won't stop churning, it's not weakness to step outside or to look up. It's wisdom. It's remembering where we came from. It's remembering that the nervous system isn't soothed by control. It's soothed by rhythm, by space, by stillness. And nature offers all three, without asking anything in return. When your thoughts are racing, your breath usually is too. And when your breath changes, your body follows. That's how everything ties together. The Stoics knew this before anyone called it neuroscience. That's why Epictetus, who once lived as a slave, still spoke about internal freedom. "No man is free," he said, "who is not master of himself." And to be master of yourself isn't about domination. It's about returning to calm, to breathe through the storm, to stay rooted when the world shakes. And you learn that not by overthinking, but by watching the sea. You feel it in the breeze. You remember it in the sky. Even Socrates, who questioned everything, didn't question the need to be still. He walked often, he spoke slowly. He paused to think before he answered. That pacing wasn't just about clarity, it was about energy. He didn't rush because truth doesn't rush. And we forget that when the mind gets loud. We believe we have to fix everything now, that peace has to be earned by overanalyzing. But peace, real peace, comes from presence. And presence is most easily found when you're staring into something vast, like the ocean or the night sky. And perhaps that's the most calming part of it all, the perspective. The way a star reminds you how small your problems are without making you feel small. The way a mountain shows you what it means to endure, not with effort, but by simply remaining. Aristotle said, "In all things of nature, there is something of the marvelous." And that marvel, when felt deeply, makes you breathe again. Not just because it's beautiful, but because it's ancient. It connects us to a time before our worries, before our plans, before we thought we had to earn rest, when simply being alive was enough. So when the mind refuses to settle, you don't need more thinking. You don't need another answer. You need to remember that serenity isn't built, it's returned to. The Stoics pointed us back to nature because nature points us back to ourselves, not our productivity, not our roles or titles or checklists, but the part of us that already knows how to rest, how to be held by the present moment, how to sit in silence and feel full. You don't need a perfect environment to feel that. You don't need a forest or a mountain. Sometimes all you need is to notice the breath in your lungs and imagine the wind moving through trees, or to close your eyes and picture stars scattered across a sky so wide it makes your fear seem manageable. That's not just imagination, that's medicine. And the Stoics practiced it often, because they knew the nervous system responds to simplicity, to patterns, to rhythm, things we forget in a world that moves too fast. And when you return to that place, even just for a few minutes, something changes. Not everything, but enough. Enough to slow the heart, to ease the grip of fear, to remind yourself that not all tension needs solving. Some just need space, and nature gives it freely. So tonight, or the next night, your mind won't stop. Don't go looking for the next solution. Go looking for the stars, or the breath, or the memory of a breeze. Because the Stoics weren't just offering philosophy, they were offering a way to come home, to yourself, through the world that made you, quietly, gently, without pressure, without perfection, just the kind of calm that waits for you, like the sea, always. There's a strange kind of guilt that creeps in when we try to rest. Not the physical rest of lying down, but the deeper kind, the rest of the mind finally letting go. It's subtle. It whispers things like, "You should be thinking about that email," or "You haven't solved that problem yet," or worse, "If you stop now, you're weak." And we believe it, because somewhere along the way, we learned to measure our worth by what we're constantly holding. But the Stoics, those deeply rational and emotionally honest thinkers, saw through this illusion. They knew that carrying everything all the time wasn't strength, it was suffering. And peace? Peace came not from doing more, but from putting things down, one by one, deliberately, without shame. This kind of surrender isn't laziness, it's clarity. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That includes our obsession with overthinking, with grinding through exhaustion, with dragging unresolved worries into bed. We think we're being responsible by doing this, but really we're letting our unconscious fears run the show. The Stoics would tell us that wisdom isn't just about knowing what to think, it's knowing when to stop thinking, when to close the mental tabs that no longer serve the moment you're in. That's where intentional unwinding comes in, not through force, but through compassion. Letting the mind place things down is a practice of faith. Faith that you'll return to them later. That rest is not abandonment. That peace is not procrastination. Marcus Aurelius, even while leading an empire, wrote this to himself. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And that starts at night, when the world slows down and all that's left is your own inner noise. That's when strength is tested, not in how much you hold, but in how gently you release. It helps to picture your thoughts as objects, each one something you've picked up throughout the day, that sharp comment from someone you barely know, that mistake you made in the morning, that one worry that keeps returning like a fly to a window. You don't need to resolve all of them right now. You just need to set them down. Maybe even speak it out loud. "I'll hold this tomorrow, not tonight." Because not every concern is urgent. Not every thought is a fire to put out. Some are just flickers, and if you don't feed them attention, they go out on their own. Aristotle once said that the mark of an educated mind is to entertain a thought without accepting it. But what he didn't add, what the Stoics practiced, is that we can also choose not to entertain certain thoughts at all when they no longer belong to the present moment. And at night, most of them don't. They're echoes of the day, shadows pretending to be substance. Letting go of them isn't denial, it's discernment. It's choosing what actually deserves your energy. And that choice, repeated, becomes a kind of inner freedom. We forget how physical this process can be. The body holds on to mental burdens too, clenched jaws, tight shoulders, shallow breathing. As you begin to put your thoughts down, you might notice the body loosening. It's not imaginary. The nervous system finally gets the signal. We're not in danger right now. We don't have to figure everything out tonight. The breath deepens, the muscles soften, the space around you feels less heavy. All from the simple act of mentally saying, "I'm setting this down." Plato believed that the soul is burdened by the distractions of the world, and only through detachment can we return to its natural stillness. That isn't just some distant, mystical idea. It's something you can feel. When you stop forcing your mind to churn, when you step back and become the observer instead of the reactor, you're aligning with what Plato called the rational soul, the part of you that doesn't cling, that sees clearly, that knows the difference between what matters now and what doesn't. And maybe that's the ultimate insight here. that the guilt we feel about resting is learned. It's a cultural habit, not a natural one. No child feels guilty for resting. No animal hesitates to sleep because it hasn't earned it. That's something we picked up along the way, and it's something we can unlearn. The Stoics unlearned it by turning inward, by choosing stillness when the world demanded speed, by valuing calm over chaos, not because they were indifferent, but because they were wise enough to know when holding on became harm. Epictetus taught that some things are up to us and some are not. Worrying about everything makes no distinction. It assumes all is under our control, all must be managed constantly. But letting the mind rest is an act of trust. Trust in the flow of life. Trust that clarity returns after rest. That good decisions come not from tired minds, but from restored ones. That tomorrow's problems are tomorrow's to handle, and you'll be stronger for having rested. So tonight, or any night you feel pulled into that tug-of-war between peace and guilt, remind yourself gently, putting things down is not failure, it's wisdom. Just like a craftsman who places tools on the bench after a long day, knowing they'll return to the work later. Just like a thinker who closes the book, not because they're done, but because they need to process what they've read. You don't lose ground by resting. You build strength, quietly, gradually, in a way the world might not notice, but you will. And if a thought insists on lingering, meet it with kindness. Name it, if that helps. This is worry. This is fear. This is pressure. And then breathe it out. Say, not tonight. Not with anger, just with clarity. Just like setting down a stone you've been carrying too long. Over time, this becomes a ritual, not of escape, but of alignment, not of denial, but of discipline. The kind that builds real resilience, not from exhaustion, but from intentional recovery. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is not worth living, but the over-examined life, the one that refuses to rest, that treats peace as something to earn through endless mental labor, that's not worth living either. There's a middle ground, a space where reflection and release coexist, where you can be thoughtful without being consumed, where you can care deeply and still sleep well. That's what letting go really is. Not forgetting, not ignoring, but placing things where they belong. And sometimes that place isn't your mind at midnight. Sometimes it's your journal, or the morning, or never again. And that's okay. Because in the end, peace isn't about having no thoughts. It's about choosing which ones stay and allowing the rest to rest, just like you. There's something subtle and powerful that happens when you stop punishing yourself for how the day went and start learning from it instead. Most people carry guilt like a backpack of stones, every mistake, every unfinished task, every harsh word they wish they could take back. It follows them into the night, pressing down on their chest, making rest feel undeserved. But guilt was never designed to linger like that. It's meant to be a signal, not a sentence. And what the Stoics understood, what thinkers like Marcus Aurelius practiced every evening, was the difference between reflection and self-condemnation. One helps you grow, the other keeps you stuck. Marcus wrote in his meditations, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive." But the other half of that rhythm was how he ended his days, by reviewing them without cruelty. That's the kind of nightly ritual that changes you. It's not about listing everything you did wrong or trying to perfect yourself before sleep. It's about meeting your flaws with honesty and your efforts with compassion. You might say to yourself, "Today I spoke when I should have listened," or "I acted from fear instead of patience," not as a punishment, but as a way of taking ownership gently, like someone cleaning a mirror, not smashing it. Carl Jung once observed that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. But the truth is, looking at yourself doesn't have to be a painful confrontation. When done with kindness, it's a return home, a moment of quiet recognition that you are still learning, that growth isn't linear, that slipping back into old patterns doesn't erase the progress you've made. This is the mindset that turns reflection from something you dread into something sacred, something that prepares you to wake up better than you were. In that space between the end of the day and the beginning of sleep, there's a chance to rewrite your relationship with guilt. You're not avoiding accountability by being kind to yourself. You're actually increasing your capacity to change. Harshness narrows the mind. Compassion opens it. Think of how you'd speak to a friend who came to you with regret. Would you shame them, or would you help them find clarity? You deserve the same tone. Reflection, when practiced gently, doesn't water down truth. It allows you to face it without flinching. Plato wrote that the first and best victory is to conquer self. But he didn't mean through force. He meant through understanding. You cannot conquer what you haven't studied. You can't transform what you refuse to look at. So sit with your day, review its edges, ask yourself where you fell short, not to scold yourself, but to notice the gap between who you were and who you want to become. That's not weakness, that's direction. And it's far more powerful than burying your mistakes under shame or pretending they didn't happen. And you don't need hours or a perfect environment to do this. A few quiet minutes, a dim room, maybe a notebook, or maybe just your own thoughts. You can start with one simple question. What did I learn today? Not what did I achieve, not what did I do right or wrong, but what did I learn? Even a mistake, when seen through that lens, becomes valuable. Socrates reminded us that the unexamined life is not worth living, but he didn't say the examined life must be harsh, just honest, just present. What you might notice over time is how this reflection softens you, not in a passive way, but in a grounded one. You'll start noticing your triggers before they explode. You'll see patterns you've repeated for years begin to loosen their grip. You'll feel the difference between guilt that drains and reflection that guides. That's what nightly compassion does. It replaces judgment with awareness. And from awareness, real change begins. It also brings your nervous system down. It lets the body know we are not in danger. We are reviewing, not reliving. There's no need to tense up, no need to brace against the past. That's how peace slips in, not by pushing thoughts away, but by welcoming them as teachers. The kind of teachers who don't shout or shame, but who sit with you in quiet rooms and remind you, you've made it through the day. Let's talk about what we learned. Aristotle believed that excellence was not an act, but a habit. These nightly reflections, if done with care, become just that, a habit of mental clarity, a habit of emotional honesty. And like all good habits, it builds over time. Each night, you get a little better at seeing yourself without distortion, a little more skilled at guiding yourself with intention, a little more rooted in who you truly are, not just who you wish you were. And maybe that's the point, that the person you wish you were isn't as far off as you think. They just need your patience. They need your willingness to look at yourself without cruelty, to accept that some days will feel like steps backward. But even those steps are part of the path if you're paying attention, if you're willing to keep showing up with open eyes and a steady heart. The Stoics never promised that this process would be easy, but they knew it would be worth it. Because it's in these quiet, honest moments at night that we stop outsourcing our growth to fate or chance. We reclaim it, one thought at a time, one breath at a time, one compassionate reflection at a time. And in doing so, we begin to understand that guilt has nothing to teach us once it's done its job. That's when growth begins, not by holding on to guilt, but by releasing it with gratitude, thanking it for the lesson, and letting it go, so you can rest, so you can begin again tomorrow a little lighter, a little clearer, a little more you. Real strength isn't always explosive. It's not the kind of power that slams fists on tables or commands attention in a crowded room. Sometimes real strength is the ability to sit in silence while the future remains a question mark. Stoic resilience, at its core, is exactly that, not the absence of fear or confusion, but the ability to endure them with grace. It's choosing presence over panic, choosing stillness over spiraling. The Stoics never promised certainty. In fact, they accepted how uncertain life was and built their peace not by trying to control what they couldn't, but by mastering their response to it. There's a certain kind of pressure we place on ourselves to appear unshaken, to show we've got everything under control, but Stoic resilience doesn't ask for that kind of performance. It asks for honesty. You don't need to fake confidence. You don't need to pretend you're fearless. You only need to stay present with what is, not what might be, not what should have been, just what is. In the words of Marcus Aurelius, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. That quote doesn't erase real suffering, but it reminds us where our power lies, not in perfect plans, but in perspective. Carl Jung once said, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness." He didn't say to fight the darkness. He didn't say to run from it. He suggested that resilience means including it, holding it, letting it be part of your story without letting it become the whole story. Stoic resilience reflects that same principle. You sit with the discomfort, and instead of trying to solve it instantly, you breathe through it. You let the noise in your mind come and go without forcing an answer to appear. It's not passive, it's patience. It's endurance that doesn't shout, but waits with quiet strength. This kind of steadiness is something that can't be faked. It's built, slowly, night by night, challenge by challenge. You cultivate it not by avoiding difficulty, but by showing up for it. When uncertainty presses against your chest and you don't know what comes next, you stay. You don't run. You stay, breathe, and remind yourself, you've handled unknowns before. You're handling one now. That's resilience. Not a dramatic declaration, but a soft decision to continue anyway. Plato believed that the measure of a person is what they do with power, but another kind of power lives in restraint, in not reacting when everything inside you wants to, in holding your composure when things are collapsing, in whispering to yourself, "This moment is uncomfortable, but it is not permanent." That thought alone can bring you back to yourself. It can shift panic into presence. Because peace, in the Stoic sense, is not a life without problems. It's the ability to meet problems without collapsing into them. This is why Stoic resilience feels so different from what we're often told strength should look like. It doesn't always come with bold decisions or confident speeches. Sometimes it's in the small, quiet acts, making your bed when you feel numb, journaling when your thoughts are jumbled, pausing before you say something you'll regret. It's in choosing not to escape through distraction, but to stay long enough to feel what's real. That's inner discipline, not coldness but clarity. You start to notice that peace doesn't arrive with answers. It arrives when you stop needing them immediately. The Stoics trained themselves to stay with uncertainty without losing themselves in it, to trust that clarity comes in time, but courage is needed now. That's something we can all practice. It's not about silencing fear, it's about learning to walk beside it. Socrates said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." That humility is the foundation of real resilience, because if you can accept not knowing, you free yourself from the lie that you should already have it all figured out. There's something powerful that happens when you stop demanding control and start cultivating composure. You realize that calm isn't a byproduct of everything going your way. It's a decision you can make even when nothing does. That doesn't mean you feel good all the time. It means you don't abandon yourself when you don't. You stay grounded even when the ground beneath you shifts. You keep breathing even when the mind races. This approach doesn't make uncertainty disappear, but it makes it less frightening. Because when you stop resisting what you can't control, you make space to respond to what you can. You move out of panic and into presence, and that presence becomes your strength, not in a loud, obvious way, but in a steady, quiet way, like the tide moving forward without rushing, like a mountain holding its place in storms. The beauty of Stoic resilience is that it's available to everyone. It doesn't depend on status, money, or luck. It depends on perspective and practice. You don't need to be perfect to be strong. You only need to return to yourself again and again, especially when it's hard, especially when it's uncertain. That's what makes it real. So when you lie awake at night, unsure of what tomorrow brings, let that be okay. Let it be human. Let it be part of the mystery you don't have to solve right now. And in that space, you might find something deeper than answers. You might find acceptance, the kind that holds you gently and reminds you, even here, even now, you are not broken. You are learning to endure without explanation, to trust without needing a timeline, to sit quietly with life just as it is, and still find peace. Sleep is often treated like a shutdown, like the off switch on a machine that's done enough for the day. But what if sleep wasn't an escape? What if it wasn't about running away from thoughts, stress, or obligation, but instead a gentle return to alignment, a recalibration with your truest self, the part of you that doesn't get caught in ego or deadlines or the noise of the world? Rest isn't the absence of doing, it's the restoration of being. And the Stoics, though warriors in the realm of action, understood the sacred weight of stillness. They didn't seek sleep as a form of collapse, but as a quiet reflection of a life lived in harmony with values, with nature, with self. The philosopher Seneca wrote, "We should every night call ourselves to an account. What infirmity have I mastered today? What passions opposed? What temptation resisted? What virtue acquired?" This was not to end the day in judgment, but in awareness, a kind of inner housekeeping, and in doing that, sleep became more than physical rest. It became spiritual alignment, a gentle laying down of the burdens we do not need to carry, and an honoring of what still calls to be cultivated. When you treat sleep this way, not as a crash, but a conscious return, you begin to notice a shift in how your days feel too. Because you're not running anymore, you're returning. Carl Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And strangely, it's in the quiet of sleep, just before you slip away, that this awakening begins. You catch a glimpse of the mind without performance, without the masks. You see the raw truth of your emotional state. Sometimes it's calm, sometimes it's messy, but it's always real. And this realness, if you welcome it, can anchor you. You're not trying to perform stoicism. You're practicing the kind of self-respect that allows peace to come find you. Peace doesn't knock loudly. It waits for space. Stillness creates that space. So many of us resist rest because we think we have to earn it. We wear our exhaustion like a badge. We rehearse the guilt of unfinished work, even as our head hits the pillow. But the Stoics would have reminded us that virtue is not in endless striving. It's in right action, and sometimes the most virtuous thing you can do is surrender your tension, not fight it. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor with more responsibility than most of us could fathom, reminded himself often, Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. That is alignment, not geographical, not circumstantial, but internal. It's what happens when you stop fleeing your experience and begin accepting it. Plato wrote that the soul takes on the color of its thoughts. If our thoughts are constantly scattered, anxious, self-critical, then that becomes the state we fall asleep in. But if we learn to guide those thoughts gently, to notice them, name them, soften them, our mind becomes a safer place to rest in. That's not about toxic positivity or pretending everything is fine. It's about cultivating an honest, humble relationship with the self. One where your nervous system doesn't have to brace every time your head touches the pillow. One where you are no longer afraid of what silence might show you. Sleep, in this sense, becomes a mirror, not one that accuses, but one that reflects. And when your reflection is tangled in restlessness or fear, the answer isn't to judge, it's to listen. What is this resistance trying to say? What value is being ignored? What wound is asking to be acknowledged? In this way, the night becomes less of a void and more of a teacher. And each night, if you allow it, you get a chance to realign, to come back to what matters. Not productivity, not image, but essence. There's a kind of integrity that comes from facing the day fully and then releasing it fully. No clinging, no rewriting, no obsessing. Just the quiet trust that you did what you could, and now you let go. Aristotle believed that happiness is the activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. What he didn't say directly, but implied, is that this includes rest, because you cannot be virtuous when you're depleted. You cannot offer clarity to others when your own inner waters are muddy. Rest isn't separate from your path. It is the part of the path where you lay down the armor, wash your hands, and come back to yourself. There's no ceremony for this, no applause, no audience, just you and the dark, and the subtle returning of breath to body, of awareness to the present, of effort to stillness. But that simplicity is sacred. That moment, when you finally allow your mind to set down its weapons, not in defeat, but in peace, that is the reward. That is the alignment. You are not escaping anything. You are participating in the deepest act of respect for your humanity. When you shift how you see rest, the whole rhythm of your life begins to change. You stop measuring your days by what you've conquered and begin to measure them by how deeply you've shown up. And at night, you don't crash into unconsciousness. You arrive, calmly, mindfully. You arrive at that threshold between noise and silence, and you choose silence. Not because you're giving up, but because you're choosing to begin again, refreshed. Tomorrow will have its own weight, but tonight, you put it down. In this way, sleep isn't the end. It's the gentle space between chapters, and the story you tell yourself in that space shapes how you'll wake. So tell it gently, tell it honestly, tell it in a way that honors both your effort and your imperfection, because in the quiet, when all distractions are gone, what's left isn't your performance, it's your essence. And that's what alignment really means, coming back to that essence, night after night, without guilt, without judgment, with grace. You don't have to fix everything tonight. You don't have to solve the world from your pillow. All you have to do is return to yourself, gently, honestly, without shame. That's the kind of peace the Stoics honored, not perfection, presence. And if even for a moment you felt that here with us, you're already on the path. If this quiet reflection helped you breathe a little deeper, there's another video waiting on the screen that might meet you right where you are. Thank you for being part of Stoic Journal. It means more than you know. Until next time, stay steady, stay soft, and keep the wisdom close.